Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Wise. I'm the Associate Director in the Bureau of Perinatal, Reproductive, and Sexual Health. This session of our monthly pitch program call is going to really focus on a demo of the PICHC DMIS data system with some new components, as well as overview of some changes that have happened recently. We don't have any program announcements, so I think we can just get started with the presentation, and if there's time at the end, we can do some question and answers. So without further ado, Michael.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and get the screen share pulled up. All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Michael Campito. I go by Mike. I'm the tech guy for the PICHC websites. I'm responsible for the website updates and operation at CHSR. Today, we thought we'd just do a little demo for y'all about how to use some of the key features of the PICHC DMIS. All of these demonstrations will be done on the PICHC training site, a site that will be made available to any of you on request, and one that will stay current on updates with the live site as time goes on. Please note that accounts on this site will be separate from your live site accounts, and you will not be able to log on to one using your credentials for the other. So without further ado, let's get into things. So to start out with, I'm going to create a case. I'll be taking a few different roles throughout this demo. I'll start as a CHW and move my way up as things arise. To begin with, let's create a new case. Every new case will begin with the initial contact form. As we proceed through these forms, I'd like to introduce you to some of the visual language that we use throughout the application, which is namely the asterisks. Asterisks tend to indicate that a question is required for successful submission. This isn't a hard and fast rule. There are some asterisks, like on the outreach event form, that indicate a question or a field is required to validate just that one section, but are not required if you're skipping that area. And there are some questions that can be situationally required that may not have asterisks. Here that can be observed in the 13 section. So as you may notice, 13A says type of referral recruitment source. 13B says if street outreach specify location, and it is required only when 13A is outreach. Similarly, 13C is required only if 13A is outside referred to PICHC. So I'm now going to try submitting when 13A is outreach, but I don't enter anything from 13B. Anytime that your submission fails, the reason will most likely be stated at the top of the page. If you ever want to know what fields are unconditionally required for a page, you can submit an empty form and it will list them all in order. Some, like 13A and 13B, may not be listed if the conditions that make them required aren't met. If it ever becomes relevant, they will be up there as well. So give me just a moment to fill out some, basics. We'll say the form date for this is March 1st. The worker is me. And very normal stuff. So real quick before we move on, I would like to draw your attention to question 12, which is race. All of the other multiple choice selections you've seen have been single select, including their other category. For example, if I enter an alternate value for 10C and then selected bisexual right afterwards, it would delete the other value and overwrite things. However, race is special on this form because it's a multi-select identifiable by the square shape of the checkboxes. You can have as many values as you want, including other race, as long as none of them are declined to self-identify or unknown. There are a few options like this throughout the DMIS that aren't really marked by much beyond common sense. Like obviously, if you decline to self-identify, you're not going to be anything else. So if you ever see a multi-select option and it wipes out the others, don't be alarmed. That's just how it is sometimes.
Can I ask a
Now I
question
think
for
we
number
spent
12?
enough time here, so let's move
Can I
on.
ask a question for number 12? I'm sorry.
Uh, sure, what is it?
Okay, so for for a lot of Hispanics, I don't identify myself as white or black. And so we put decline self-identity. Why are you trying to categorize Hispanics in just white and black? And why do we have so many Asian and there's so many other
These
races?
are all questions for the DOH. I just construct the website. I don't make any of the policy decisions.
Oh,
As a quick heads up, we'll try and have some time for Q&A at the end. But I have timed this presentation and it's almost an hour. So we're going to be running pretty short on time. So if something's like super important in the
I
moment,
mean, we're into this for 2 years, and this is the first time that we're going step by step. So I appreciate that. It's just
sure.
like we should be. I think a lot of us would love to have the opportunity to question each section, so that we can know that if we're doing the work right or not. And that's never been the opportunity at this point. So I'm going to value that you're going to go through it because that's beneficial, but I also would be we really need someone who would go through it and talk to us, because that's the answer I always get. You got to talk to DOH. So, and we're not getting that response. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Sure, completely understandable. I'll leave that up to DOH discretion as I'm running this demo at their behest. Part of the reason I'm moving through this relatively stably is that this is being recorded and is intended to be used for a training video down the line. However, again, I'll leave it up to them. And thank you at the minimum for your input. That was appreciated. Okay. So where was I? So at the bottom of this form, you'll notice that there's 3 options for action taken, and some descriptions of what they'll do. Since some changes a few years back, streamlining the path taken through case progress doesn't actually go anywhere. It's more of a declaration of intent than anything these days. So for the purposes of this demo, we're going to move on to the screening form. So I will be picking option 2 and submitting. Oh, missed one. Now, as you can see, upon submission, we will be taken to the newly created case homepage. You may notice a bundle of fields up here, though they'll almost all be empty at the moment. These are some of the things we get the most questions about, though they're more used for your convenience in tracking than they are for reporting purposes. I'll go through a few of them so you know what you're looking at. Intake date is the form date of the screening form. As you can see in the top right, a case is only considered pending until the screening assessment is done, at which point it will be moved to active. The intake date is correlated with when that transition happens, not with the initial contacts. Discharge date is the form date of the discharge form. Similarly, this will move the case status from active to discharge. Please note that expiration, which we'll get to in a bit, and discharges are not the same thing, and an expiration date will be tracked separately from the discharge date. Current CHW is the currently assigned CHW to the case. This is initially set in the initial contact form, but can be updated by anyone supervisor level and above by clicking the CHW history button right here. I'm currently CHW, so can't do that. We'll return to this during the supervisor section of the demonstration. So those are all the easiest ones to explain. So we'll come back to the rest with a bit more context. For now, let's go into the screening form so we can get started. I'll start by showing the absolute minimum for submission, and then we can go a bit further down the line. So as you can see by, all of this, this is a little more involved than the initial contact form, and it's generally the longest of the available forms. Make sure that you have the uninterrupted time to complete it in a sitting, otherwise you may lose your progress due to our timeout security feature and have to start over. Structurally, the screening form is divided into a few different sections. The first few of these are exclusive to the screening form and are there to gather initial client information. And then others are reused in other forms like the update form and the discharge form. And they are expected to be updated on a semi-annual basis. In general, you can identify a recurring section by its section title. These recurring sections are often used to calculate and update various reports and sections of the case homepage details, and they are often self-contained validation-wise. For example, if you see this section, client with children under 12 months, there are many questions, namely 30, 31, 32, 33, 34A, 35A and B, and 36, that all become required as soon as 29 is answered yes. So we're going to go through. Interesting to note is that setting the worker only ties a worker to the case on the initial contact form. As far as the actual further forms go, somebody who's not directly the CHW can enter a form without changing who's assigned to the case. That's more managed in the CHW history. So we're just going to kind of sporadically click around because this person is not real. Note that had well visit with primary care provider in the past year is set to no. Now, here in the reproductive history or the RHI, we have a few notes. So this is a section that is also present in the update form and the discharge form and is used in determining client life course, as well as gestational age and expected delivery date in the case homepage. All of these will reference the most recent RHI, but there's also client life course at intake, which is decided here and will not change unless this form specifically is edited. Number of previous pregnancies does count the current pregnancy and should not be 0 if the client is prenatal. So we're going to, for demonstration purposes, set this to be someone who has a child 12 months or younger and is also currently pregnant. And the currently pregnant date will be, say, the 17th. Since they are currently pregnant, we don't need to answer any of these. I'm going to skip the general health and well-being. As a general note, if 17A is yes, then that does make 17B, 23A, 24, 25A and B, 26, 27, and 28 required. If it's no, then 18A is required. We're going to mark this as it was and then go on to fill these out real quick. More multi-selects, so there's not really anything except for no one that will close these out, because if they have no one, they're definitely not meeting the other things. So the child under 12 months section, we do have to fill out because we did mark that we have a previous child. There is going to be a good amount of this demo that is me quietly clicking through these things because, you know, it's a little hard to talk and do all this at the same time. So I appreciate your patience on that. So we often get questions about how we calculate life course. So I'm going to take a quick detour to talk about how it works. It generally references the most recent RHI, as well as the most recent child and pregnancy form, if that's relevant. First, we check question 61, non-birthing caregiver, to see if that's yes. If so, it will override anything else and the client will be a non-birthing caregiver forever. They aren't, it'll check if the most recent RHI or child pregnancy form indicates that they are pregnant with a child they have not given birth to yet. If they are, they're prenatal. The most recent event chronologically is a birth. Depending on if it's been 8 weeks since that birth, they will be interconception or postpartum. If the most recent event is an RHI and currently pregnant was marked as not pregnant or unknown, it will check if there's a child form with a birth date beforehand to do the same math. And if that doesn't exist, it'll check last delivery date from question 15 on the screening assessment. If none of those things exist at all, it will finally check the number of previous pregnancies to see if the client is postpartum there. So as you can see, there's a lot of math that goes into this, but the only conditions where it should be inaccurate is if you need to put in an update form or to have a more recent RHI indicating pregnancy status. If that RHI was missing or incorrect on information, or if you're overdue for a child and pregnancy form. With the information we're presenting here, the client should be considered prenatal at intake. So up next, we have the various screens. None of these are technically required for intake, and unlike most of the other stuff, they can also be done standalone from the case homepage if you ever need to do so, and we'll go over that in a bit. So we're going to skip most of them for now. We'll do audit C just for fun and to show this off later. We're going to say moderate risk, negative, client was not referred, and right. If you do start them, they are self-contained as far as validation goes. So the more that you can fill out, the better. As for stuff in this section that's required, it's only really question 59, and that's partially required for submission. And as you can see, the only required column, as denoted by the asterisk, is the currently experiencing column. Everything else is recorded and great to put in if you have the info and time. But you only ever need answers for just the one. So I'm going to fill these up. All right. Now, there's a special note I'm going to make that I am putting in birth plan, and I think there's one here for breastfeeding. There's not. This is a would you like more information about section. So we do have in the case homepage some notes that say birth plan completed, breastfeeding education. Those are both no, despite the fact we said they were interested in birth plan. That's because they have not actually entered that on an encounter form yet. So we'll do that in a bit. But as you can see, intake date is now set. Currently pregnant is now yes. The expected delivery date is what we entered. Insurance status is what we set in 13A, which is yes, and 13B, which is private insurance, family planning, Medicaid extension. And Medicare source is what we set in 11A, and gestational age is calculated based on the expected delivery dates. So we're going to go right into the encounter form now. We're going to set the encounter date to today. Well, let's make it yesterday. And the worker to me, and we're going to proceed through the form pretty quick. Questions 1, 2, and 4A are the only questions that are required at base. 4B can be required if 4A is in person, and some of the tables that we get to down here have their own rules, but if you're trying to do the bare minimum, that's all you need. We're going to mark down some activities, most notably completed and reviewed birth plan, and provided breastfeeding information and support. We'll also throw on at least one entry onto each of the tables below. Now, you may be wondering, what's the deal with these asterisks if they're not required? The rule is that these asterisk fields are required for a row to be saved. So if I enter the type of visit here, but not the date of visit, and I submit, and I scroll down, we're going to mark this as in person on the way. You'll see that that whole row is gone because it did not have enough data. For technical reasons, mostly due to the ability to add more rows to a given table, none of these errors will throw a warning if improperly filled. They will simply be emptied. So be extra sure to double check them if you're not sure about something. So for now, we're going to fill out one row for every table following these rules and 2 for the referrals. Pay special attention to the referrals we'll be entering, as we'll be seeing them again in a moment. So this one we're going to be entering a date closed for, and this one we will not. So this failed because we didn't have 4B there, despite the fact 4A was in person. So as we're scrolling back down to submit, as you may note that all of the forms that we filled out, all the table entries have been saved successfully because, you know, they've been filled out successfully as opposed to earlier. So we're going to submit again. And with that, we're back to the case detail page. There's only 2 more forms we're going to look at how to enter today. But before we do, I want to make a quick detour again. First off, note that birth plan completed and breastfeeding education up here are both set to yes. These are a binary state of completion, tracking if you've ever participated in those activities in any of your encounter forms. So they will now be yes forever unless you delete this encounter for whatever reason. So we're going to check out the screenings tab next. You'll note that all of the screenings we've done on the screening form are here, mostly marked as incomplete, except for A, which we did fill out and has the score here. If we clicked on edit or view, it would take us back to the screening form we did because that was the original source of the screening. And it would allow us to edit and resubmit, but we're actually going to add a new screening instead. Now, as you can see, it's been added to the list as a self-contained entry and can be edited or deleted afterwards. The service referrals page works similarly. If we tab over to that, we'll see that one of the referrals that I entered, we'll see both referrals I entered earlier on the encounter form, one of which is lacking a date closed. This is one of the things that's tracked by the standard CHW sidebar, which we will see if we full screen this for a moment. Doesn't show up in half view, but due to the fact I have a whole script for this, we won't be seeing it too often. Just note that it is there. So we could hit the edit button to fix that, but we're just going to add another referral here in much the same way as the new hits we added. As a rule, if a screening or referral was added on a form, the edit button will take you to that form. And if it was added here, it will be a standalone modal here. These standalone forms also are much less time consuming, excuse me, due to having less required information. So they're a great option on short notice. With that detour out of the way, let's continue on to the child and pregnancy form. So we do get a lot of questions about this form I'd like to address now. To begin with, the most pressing question is, what do we do when a client has existing children when they finish intake? And the answer is that each child should get a child pregnancy form if they're intended to receive services. The general rule of the form is that you should have one form per pregnancy, and multiple children should only ever be tied to a singular form if it's a multiple birth event like twins or triplets. Some workers tend to throw every child that a client has before intake on the same pregnancy form, and while there's technically nothing to stop that, it's not the way the system was designed, so we really don't recommend it. The child pregnancy form has a unique layout where it is technically two different forms. Pregnancy form is the main one, and it comprises the first and third sections. That is to say, all this up here and all this down here. And it can contain multiple child forms within. These child forms are what unlocks the ability to do ASQs, which is the only real gating of forms that we have outside the initial contact and screening assessment, which hold everything else behind them. They are also the only forms technically tied to the child instead of the client. So even when you're entering like baby medical forms, baby vaccination, those are all technically tied to the client because we don't have a real way to connect that. Whereas the ASQ is tied specifically to the child because it's being tracked based on their age. So as for the form itself, the required fields are generally pretty easy. 1, 2, 3A, 4, 5, 6A, 7, 24A, and 25 are all required at baseline on the pregnancy form. Situationally required is 3B if 3A is yes, 6B if 6A is yes, and 24B if 24A is yes. So please note that 3B has two options for answers, listing a trimester or listing a date they began receiving prenatal care. If you input one, you should not include the other or you're going to fail validation. This is a relatively recent change that we implemented because we were dealing with too many conflicting dates impacting reports. So if we try and do both of them, say, bada bing, and we submit, it'll say if date is not nothing, then trimester should be nothing. So we're going to clear that out. 3B has a few rules if you're inputting a date, namely that it cannot be a date in the future as calculated from today's date. It cannot be later than the latest child associated with the form's birth. Essentially, if you're not entering typos, you're probably good on that front. So I'll finish this off. Of all of the required fields we discussed, 7 is the most important as that actually determines the number of child forms that you need to fill out. It goes as low as 0, but trying to submit with that will throw an error. You try and submit as we don't allow that anymore. If you list an expected due date during the most recent RHI, that will be listed under the birth date column. But as we can never guarantee what child you're actually entering for this, it could be a child that exists from years ago, or it could be the upcoming birth. That's not enforced in any way so much as it is a reference point. So once you have the amount of child forms that you're going to need, you'll need to fill out at minimum 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, 21, and 22 for each respected child. Things are pretty standard here, with the latest birth date entered needing to be before the form date, and everything else about as expected. But special attention should be paid to question 11. Living with non-birthing caregiver does not mean that the child was adopted by the client. It does mean, in fact, that the client adopted the child. If every child that a client has is marked as living with a non-birthing caregiver, that client's life course will change to non-birthing caregiver, regardless of what you answered as far as question 61 of the screening assessment form. So I'm now going to fill out the child. And they were both born about what you'd expect. We'll just do unknown gestational and birth weight to save some extra time. And then we have to fill this out for the second one as well. This one we are going to enter as a wrong child because we will be coming back to this. All right. This clicked. So receiving breast milk. It's also required. My apologies. Okay. So with all of that sorted, we only have one form left to look at before we can get into supervisor and above functionality, which is the discharge form. The discharge form is a long form about screening form length that is mostly optional and is the last step to close an enrolled case. The only required questions are 1, 2, 3A, 4A, and 4C, with 3B recommended to be filled out and 4B required if 4A was yes. So I'm going to submit this. Now, when I say 3B is recommended, it's tracked by the DOH and would normally be required, but it's kind of assumes that if you did not go out of your way to say yes on this, that it was no, and thus it will autofill as no. Everything else about this form can be treated as a follow-up or an update form if the case ever needs to be reinstated. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3A, 4A, and 4C. So getting the rest of this information is not required, but it can be helpful if you suspect the client will ever return, as the data can be repurposed through re-entry as an update form. All of the other forms are the standalone modules that we've seen on the screening form. So we have the RHI, we have general health and well-being, currently pregnant client, children under 12 months, and the various screenings themselves. These are all not required for discharge, but as before, if you answer yes on question 17, for example, you will be obligated to complete that section. So let's go back to this. So for now, we're going to undo and ignore that section since I think the point is demonstrated, and we're going to submit the discharge form itself. As this takes us back to the case homepage, you will notice that the status has been changed on the case details from enrolled to discharged. The only way to re-enroll the client on the main case is to delete the discharge form using data entry or program manager permissions. Discharged cases can have no forms submitted after the discharge date and are generally considered closed by the system for dashboard and reporting purposes. They will show up red on the case list as well, and the currently active CHW can be unassigned by clicking the Remove from the CHW Caseload button at the top right if you're a supervisor or above. The only way to undo the discharge status is generally to delete the discharge form, which is something we'll cover momentarily. However, do note that deleting the discharge form also deletes any extra data we enter. So I personally recommend creating an update form with the same date as the discharge form and copying over the relevant data before doing so. You can do this by creating forms up to and including the discharge date of a case without deleting the case. And so it can be helpful to do so for record-keeping purposes if they ever need to be re-enrolled. And speaking of re-enrollment, within the system, there are 4 different states of enrollment. There's pending, which is when an initial contact form has been completed, but nothing else has. Enrolled, which is anytime a screening form has been completed, but a discharge has not. Discharge, which is when a non-deleted discharge has been completed. And expired, which is a special option that you have after completing an initial contact, but before the screening form is completed. We're going to go to this pending case right here and expire it now. So as you can see, the top right of this case has a button that says Mark is expired. Click on this and enter a date. And the case will be considered as expired until such a point as a screening form has been entered, at which point it will be moved to enrolled. Expired cases are removed from a CHW's sidebar and dashboard until such a time as they have been re-enrolled. So feel free to use the feature if someone isn't coming back. It is very reversible. So as you can see, it's no longer on my case sidebar. Probably should have demonstrated that it was there before, but live and learn. But it is still visible on the case homepage. If we search this, we can see it right here. So if you ever need to re-enroll, you can do that here. As a rule of thumb, if the case is pre-screening, you enter an expiration date to remove it from a dashboard. And if it's post-screening, you throw on a discharge form. So that about concludes the CHW section of this demo. So now I'm going to change profiles and give a quick rundown of some of the other roles we have available. First off, we have supervisors. The supervisor role, as far as it goes in the system, is primarily responsible for form approvals. It has all of the basic capabilities of the worker and the ability to approve and unapprove forms as needed. Whenever one of your assigned workers finishes a form, it will be moved to your taskbar as a form approval waiting to happen. For the purposes of this demo, it's just my account, so this will all be empty. I'll just be doing all of this manually. So we're going to go to the demo case that we worked on. Once you're at a case, you will find that every form either has an X or a check mark next to it. X indicates that a form is unapproved, while the check indicates that the form has been approved. To approve a form, simply enter it, confirm the details, and scroll to the bottom. If you have a role with permissions equal to or greater than those of a supervisor, you will find a button in the bottom right labeled Approve. Simply hit that button, and you will be all set. So as you can see, check mark now. It should be noted form approval locks in all existing information and forbids any future changes. So if I wanted to make this Urdu or Greek, I can't anymore. If you ever need to change part of an existing approved form, simply unapprove it using the red button on the bottom right, make the change and reapprove it. Approvals only need to be submitted for client case forms, which is to say the forms that we see here. The outreach event form and the training form will never need approvals, nor will any referrals or screenings entered through the case homepage outside of a form, as we demonstrated earlier. So if we go over to the referrals, we'll see there's should have clicked the new one. There is no approval button here. As long as there are approvals to be found in a case, it will appear in the sidebar as having work that needs to be done. However, from time to time, you may come to a case where it says there are required form approvals and be unable to find them. These are rare circumstances that can happen if the worker is submitting specifically the screening or discharge form and submits the same form in multiple windows by accident. I have a theory this can also happen if they're mashing the submission button. I'm not quite as sure on that. As the discharge form and screening forms were only ever intended to be entered once, a second form can be shadow entered in this way, which shows up as a form needing approval in the sidebar, but you can't see it from the case homepage. If you ever run into this issue, feel free to contact me through our ticketing system and I will confirm and resolve it for you. So getting more directly back on track, the other new option available to supervisor role workers is the CHW history page. So now we can afford to go in this. The CHW history page lets you view and edit the history of CHWs assigned to a specific case. You can see here that I am listed as Campito Mike with an assignment date of the form date tied to the initial contact, which for this case was, 3/1. CHWs are initially assigned upon completion of the initial contact form, but can be edited here or in the program detail screen, which we'll get to, through case transfers. To add a new worker, simply click the Add button in the top right, select the CHW you'd like to enter. We're going to do worker existing, enter their assignment date, which we'll do as today, and click Submit. So as you can see, the current worker is considered worker existing, but we still have the record of me being assigned to the case previously, and it's updated here as well. If you're introducing a new CHW, it's much better to add them separately like I just did, rather than edit the existing one so we have a better history of worker progression. We do also offer the option to remove a CHW from the history, even potentially leaving the field blank, but there aren't really a lot of circumstances that require this. Still, if one ever comes up, it's available as a workaround. So this about covers the additions that the supervisor role can do. So we're going to move on to the data entry role next. So data entry, despite the very basic name, shares more of its powers with the program manager rather than the CHW. It's sometimes given to supervisors that handle a lot of the back-end work of program management, and it comes with a few new powers as a result. First, this is the role that grants access to the delete button for cases and forms. So as we see here, we have Tiffany demo duplicate. We go to this client, we can see that the bottom right of the case now has a button that says delete case. We're going to do that in a moment, but first we're going to check out their screening form. So as you can see, by scrolling down to the bottom of this page, there'll be a new button in the bottom left corner labeled delete. This completely erases the form and all of its data, so it should only be done when there is certainty that a form has been entered wrong beyond all repair, generally a duplicate. We're going to do this now just to demonstrate what it looks like, but be aware that the amount of work to reconstruct even a single erroneously deleted case or form is not small. And to do so for a deleted case is exponentially more difficult and time-consuming, to the point that we don't really offer it outside of specific circumstances. I'm just saying this to stress it as much as I can. The delete button should only be used when there is certainty a form or case should not exist, like here with this helpfully labeled duplicate client. So screening form is gone. Most of these forms work about the same, with the only real exception being the child and pregnancy form. In that form, you'll have the opportunity to delete the child forms individually and not just the pregnancy form encompassing them. Please do not delete all of the children out from a pregnancy form. But if you say accidentally listed children from multiple pregnancies in the same pregnancy form, this is the way to clear them out. So we're going to go to this. All right, I forgot to mention, if you delete the screening assessment, it removes the ability to interact with any of the forms that are past that, because that's not how our workflow works. It's checking to make sure the screening assessment exists. So this is why we entered on tests the extra child wrong. So if we go down here, you can see, in addition to the delete button at the bottom that covers the whole form, there's a delete button here that only deletes out child wrong from the form. So I've done that. Very good. And now I'm going to go delete demo duplicate in its entirety. That's one duplicate cleared out. As you can see, it's no longer here. Though that's one that's a bit more involved than most, thanks to the demo. I think the only thing that we really need to show from here is worker management protocols. So let's get started with that. To begin with, we're going to go to settings and then program detail. The settings page will have variable amounts of information and links depending on what your currently logged in role is, with only data entry and program managers getting access to the program detail page. We're going to mess around with a few staffing things using our new permissions. So to begin with, let's assign a supervisor to our good friend, me. This interface is pretty simple. It works identically to CHW history for cases. We're just going to hit the add button, assign existing worker as a supervisor with an add date of 3/1/24. Once we've done that, if we go back to the program detail page and then tab over to that worker, you should see that their caseload is now one case from the case transfer we did earlier, and one supervisee, which is from the supervisor assignment we did just now. We'll return to them in a moment, but for now, let's go back to the program detail again and go hire a new worker. So they're going to be a CHW supervisor, have a hire date of today, and they're going to have a username we set up beforehand, which is to say new worker right here. If a worker is ever, like normally you'd have to submit a request to me to create this username before setting up the worker record. But given that I can just do that, I have prepared it ahead of time. If a worker is ever having consistent trouble accessing their worker dashboard, be sure to double check that their username is linked here, because that can cause problems with that if it hasn't been done. We also got to fill out the %FTE, which we're going to make 100%, and then we'll be good to go. So we got this new worker. Everything's looking good over here. And we'll go back to the program detail page. Now, the last thing that we really need to cover is probably termination. So it has come time for existing worker. They've decided that they're moving on from the program, and so we will be transferring over their responsibilities to new worker. Now, the way we're going to do this is by assigning a termination date to their worker record, but we have to be careful. Doing so will automatically unassign all supervisees and cases they may have without a replacement. So we're going to take some steps to prevent that from happening. And this is so important. This happens every couple of months. Someone gets, someone moves on from the program, and these steps aren't followed, and all of their cases and all of their supervisees are unassigned, and we have to track them down manually, which is, a process and a half. So Doing so will automatically unassign all supervisees and cases they may have without a replacement. So we're going to take some steps. To do this, we simply have to go to the bottom of each of these rightmost columns, click Select All, and then click someone to transfer them to. In this case, we're going to do Worker New. You want to do this more piecemeal, or you need to do this more piecemeal, you can do this by selecting the checkboxes for each case and supervisee individually, but given that there's only one of each, we're going to do it all at once. It can also be helpful if you're doing a mass transfer of workers that isn't necessarily for a firing situation. That's more for when this piecemeal thing could be more beneficial. But once again, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So as you can see, there are no cases or supervisees left, which means it's time to enter a termination date. We're just going to hit edit under the worker detail over here, enter our desired date, which will be today, and then presto. They now have a termination date. All of their cases are unassigned, and they have, they're good. This isn't the only step in termination, but it is the only one that you will ever have to worry about. For the other one, you have to put in a ticket requesting inactivation of their account, because this does not disable their user accounts in case they're like transferring programs or something like that. So you need to contact me and tell me who it is that needs to be have their account deactivated and when it needs to happen, preferably on the day of, and I will take care of that. They will lose access to the system on that desired date. So we can check in on the new worker, and we'll note that they have been assigned the 2 cases that have been transferred to them. And if we log in as them, going to log in as a supervisor first. So you can see we have our supervisee on the left and the form approvals that need to happen on the right, as you'd expect. And if we go ahead and change roles to a community health worker, oh, right. You normally notice here that the case has been properly assigned. But given that we have discharged both of the cases, that neither one of them will be appearing here. But they normally would be. So that about concludes our demo. There's only one thing really left to know how to do, and it's probably the most important thing of all. And that's knowing how to contact me. If you ever need to get in touch for any reason, be it activating or deactivating a user account, you're running into a bug, anything else, just click this link on the main page sidebar. We'll take you to this form where you need to fill out your first name, last name, email, what program you're from, which will all be autofilled, what you're running into, and as many details as you can. If it's a bug localized to one specific case, mention the case number. If it's only happening on one specific form, mention what form and any special reproduction steps. Good tickets get faster responses as there's way less guesswork on our end as to what could be going wrong, so they're always appreciated and lead to a faster resolution. Please do be aware that we only handle issues related to the site itself, not IT problems with computers, networks, and the like. That's more for your local IT departments, but we are around and happy to help. So, that concludes our presentation on how to use the PICHC DMIS.